wanted to start back a little while ago. You've spoken about how when you met Francis Collins, maybe you can get it to stand up. There you go. An artist at work. When you met Francis Collins, who was then the head of the NIH, you asked him, why are scientists studying music? And he said it was the connection to the brain. So my question for you is, did that surprise you? Or was it more of course, I could have told you that moment?
No, it was all surprising because this was 7 years ago. So I really had been reading in newspapers for the most part that scientists were actually researching music. And so that was my question to him is why? Don't they have better things to do? And he said, actually, we have a new brain initiative, and music is mapped in every known part of the brain. And so we want to understand why, but we really want to understand the mechanisms of what happens in the brain when we're engaging with music and the arts, because then we can kind of decide if it's really useful in healthcare, which now has since been proven to be a yes.
So the brain in health is the focus of a lot of the book that you edited, Music in Mind, and I was struck by some of the examples in the book, and in particular, people who had advanced dementia who couldn't recognize the loved ones around them, and yet they could sing songs that they knew from childhood and dance to familiar tunes. And do you think that music could be a therapeutic for memory and cognition?
Well, it already is, and in elder care facilities, and especially those that have many people with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, it's extraordinarily effective. It brings them back to their selves. They get a sense of identity again, and this is because music memory is the last memory to go in all of us, especially if we've been connected to it at some point. But it's those favorite songs from our teen years, early years that stick the most. And I saw this with my husband's aunt. We would prompt her with 3 words, I'm looking, and she would sing the entire song, note, word perfect, though she was stationary, lying down, her eyes were closed, she didn't recognize anyone, and otherwise never spoke. And this is quite common, actually. So scientists and researchers are trying to extend those periods of lucidity and identity and find out, how can we make this work? How can we keep this? And somebody has explained to me recently, Dan Levitin, we were talking, and he said he believes scientists are starting to think, they thought it's muscle memory, but in fact they're starting to think that this type of memory and music are so ancient in our brains that they're deeply embedded and therefore they're affected at the end of a really intractable disease like Alzheimer's disease. So they don't know yet is the answer. They really don't know why this works, but it's powerful.
Well, one of the things they're trying to do to figure out how some of this works is to study the brain, and you participated in some of this research. You did an fMRI, a functional MRI, where they're not just taking a static picture of your brain, but over time as your brain does things. What was that like? What did they find?
So this was at the NIH, actually, shortly after I started working with Dr. Francis Collins and the Kennedy Center and the NEA to kind of create this initiative that shares the research with the public. And they said, okay, well, how about you? Let's have you have an experiment at the NIH. So this is fMRI measures oxygen in the brain, and the experiment had me speaking, singing, and imagining singing. And by far, imagining singing was the most powerful, affected far more parts of my brain. And they were surprised by this, the scientists who were looking at the results, and they said, we think maybe it's because you're a singer, so the singing part is second nature, but we don't really know. I wish they had followed it up with a non-singer to see if there was a big difference. But
you sang inside the machine.
Definitely.
What was that like?
For 2 hours. The experiment, I don't think I understood what I was signing up for, but I always tell...
the machines are noisy, right?
Well, I always tell people, I said, if you've flown economy enough times, then it's really pretty much the same thing as being in an MRI machine. So I don't find it frightening at all. But yeah, it's very noisy.
So beyond the brain, there are other potential benefits of music. And you wrote about one that, and there's a chapter in the book about this, that you said surprised even you. You want to talk about that?
This is
the
probably
benefits of singing specifically.
Yes, cardiac failure,
Yes.
exactly. Jacqueline Kolinsky is a fantastic researcher who's now heavily funded by the NIH, who discovered that she met a music therapist actually, and she discovered that in doing an experiment that singing twice a week. And they picked the national anthem, which I would not have recommended. It's like the hardest thing there is to sing.
It does require robust effort.
And a lot of range. But in any case, for these patients who are largely sedentary, this was exercise. And it improves pulmonary health because you're having to sustain your breath. So it turned out to be very beneficial and improved their vascular health. And so she's gotten more funding to expand this whole experiment. Because people will tell these patients, oh, you have to exercise, but many of them will never exercise. And so this is something fun, and it's easy. The thing about creative arts therapies is they're so cost effective. They're really low cost, non-pharmaceutical, and non-invasive. And they work, and they also increase morale for everybody in the ecosystem. So, for instance, for Alzheimer's patients, having arts in elder care facilities brings a 3-to-1 return on investment. Because now we're doing economic models. The NeuroArts Blueprint is really looking at the economic benefits of having these types of interventions with patients, and it's incredible what they're finding.
Well, you mentioned how it's non-invasive, and that was something I was struck by in her chapter, that she said that singing is a safe intervention. It is safe. And it made me wonder, is there any actual possibility of harm from any of these musical interventions? Like any therapy, could it possibly be misapplied?
Well, music therapists will tell you that you have to really have some training if you're doing a particular intervention. They're highly trained, they're licensed, it's board certified actually. And what they'll say, for instance, if somebody loves heavy metal, in the moment where they're about to undergo a procedure where they need to be super calm, maybe not the best time. So they might encourage them to think of something a little bit different in that moment. But I also met somebody who does a lot of research on psychedelics with veterans, and she said the only thing that calms her down is Metallica. So maybe you do end up with that.
Counterintuitive.
But it's all taste-based. It's all what you like.
So along those lines, what are some things that any of us could do to apply music to our own well-being? Those of us who are not musicians or singers or even trained, as you say, therapists?
Well, for health and wellness, many of us already use music as a tool for energy, for exercise, for, sort of in having states of awe when we're outside in nature. Then it'll be a different kind of music, and certainly if we're in a spa, it's a very different kind of music. But doctors are starting to get smart and use it when they have to when we have to have a painful procedure or some kind of uncomfortable or when we have a procedure, or when we have anxiety in a healthcare setting, which, frankly, that's pretty consistent. So those are all wonderful ways of using music. But I love the statistic that if there's a painting on a wall in a hospital room, the average stay is 2 days less. That's the healing power of the arts. Even, I think, included in that study is a window with greenery outside. So aesthetic experiences are part of our DNA, and if we ignore them and think we don't need them and think that they're really not beneficial to us, we don't understand how slowly we evolve.
Do you encounter much skepticism about the idea that these interventions should be part of the official healthcare system?
Well, in the beginning, 7 years ago, you heard a lot of skepticism. This isn't real medicine, it's soft science, but we're not hearing that anymore because the NIH has funded $40 million in research for music and health. They're now adding dance because people with movement disorders like Parkinson's, MS, people who have had stroke, it's all about the plasticity of the brain, that they can move fluidly and comfortably and even gracefully with music and rhythm interventions. So people they're very understanding now that this is something that could be helpful. And COVID was actually helpful for two reasons. One, pulmonary health, that breathing lessons, working with a music therapist with a kazoo or a harmonica was beneficial. It's also the one-on-one support and support for families, which is especially good for pain. Pain is one of the major points of intersection in terms of research right now because we have natural opioids in the brain. that can be activated with this type of experience. As I said, awe is extremely healthy. And so all of this, I think, is beginning to kind of trickle down, but it's still new. The real research, the hardcore research is pretty new.
Are there things that you do in your, beyond the work that you do that is specifically for your well-being? You've mentioned that you've experienced pain yourself, and do you apply this? Do you apply specific techniques? How do you take care of yourself?
Well, I am now the poster child this year for neuroarts, because starting January 1st, I went, this is going to be a hard year. And of course, we didn't even know all of the incredible, trauma that we're reading about day to day. I said, I'm swearing off Opinion News, sorry, and thank you, Wall Street Journal. And I just want the real news, and I also want to have an aesthetic experience every day. So I'm going to concerts and theater and opera. I'm reading novels back to back, which I haven't done in years. And I make sure I get outside and enjoy nature, because that's really one of the most powerful lifts for me personally. And I can't tell you how much happier I am. It really works.
Well, one of the things that I was also struck with in the book, going back to the brain, is how music works with the reward centers of the brain. And it wasn't just you get a dopamine rush. It was a very complex process. Why was that important?
Well, the interesting chapters in the beginning of the book, which I did on purpose, one is on evolution. That was my way in, because I was not getting this. I, as a musician, thought, how can this possibly work? So evolution, and then Dan Levitin's chapter on the neuroanatomy of the brain is really fascinating. And then there are some scientists who talk about this development of the research and how they really started the applications, the scientific applications. But yeah, it is remarkable. But it's technology that's made it possible, that we can measure with fMRI, with EEG, with various tools. And that's really made all the difference in the world. We hardly understand the brain. It's the most complex organism in the known universe. But we're getting there.
So right now, I don't imagine much of this kind of therapy is reimbursed by insurance. What would it take and what are you doing to try to get the research done that needs to be done in order to justify reimbursement and make it paid for?
Thank you for asking. So we need licensure and board certification for creative arts therapists, because we haven't even talked about this, but Liz Diller has an amazing chapter on architecture in the book. There's Anna DeVere Smith on theater, and we have so many other artistic, and Anjan Chatterjee and Juliet King on visual art. So these are all beneficial. Most of the existing research is on music, which is why it's music heavy. But we need to have, of course, a pipeline. I just funded investigator awards, with young scientists who pair with an artist, and the applications were off the charts. And I'm doing this with NeuroArts, which is connected to Johns Hopkins and the Aspen Institute. And I'm really excited, and I think we want to really get sponsors and increase the number of grants we can give every year. But that's it, a strong pipeline for the research, dissemination of the results of the research, which will take a long time, but policy changes that really make this part of our healthcare system, because ultimately I think it does belong there and will get there. But one of the barriers is that the board certification is state by state. And so there are only 12 states currently who offer this. And most of the work happening in hospitals, like every children's hospital should have a creative arts studio. They benefit so much from this. Exactly, thank you. And it's incredibly important that we get this into the planning stages of all of this. How about education? K through 12 education. There are so many initiatives that are starting really new plans for education, and most of them are STEM. I love STEM. We all love STEM. But STEAM gives kids a reason for staying in school. It has a huge effect on truancy. It has this expressive quality that an artistic piece can give them, helps them with identity, with knowing who they are. It's incredibly important for childhood development.
And there also seem to be a lot of therapeutic benefits in children with music, specifically in autism. How does that work?
Well, for instance, a child who is nonverbal, an autistic child, first of all, you can diagnose early. There's tremendous research being done in Nashville on this. Many kind of children's issues and disorders can be diagnosed early with music interventions. And rhythm. Rhythm is the basis for speech. So if a child's having difficulty with rhythm, that's an indicator. But I want to mention one of the strongest points of research so far is melodic intonation therapy, which works with aphasia, with adults with aphasia from dementia, usually from traumatic brain injury, but from stroke also, and also in children with autism on the autism spectrum. They can become verbal. It can take time, but also. After a stroke or a brain injury, it can be one session with a music therapist, because, I love this is my favorite one, it's because singing lives in a different part of the brain. And I don't know why, but you can sing with text. So you can communicate by singing if you have that access to that training with the therapist. And so most people don't know about this. And they never speak again. And there's a wonderful film called Music Got Me Here about a boy who had a horrible snowboarding accident with a brain injury. And it took him a while, but with a music therapist, he regained speech, which is a real gift.
Music intonation therapy is what it's called?
That's what it's called, yeah.
So you mentioned children, and I kind of wondered, do you feel that you need to be involved with music from childhood to truly appreciate it, or can it be learned later in life to appreciate music?
Oh, it can be learned anytime. I mean, I think music is available to all of us. It's kind of part of the air we breathe. It's everywhere. I mean, I've gone into stores and heard the most irritating music and thought, somebody's done marketing research. They know that this is going to make me buy something, or maybe they don't want me as a customer and are hoping I leave quickly. Who knows? I mean, but yeah,
but it affected your brain.
Yeah, definitely. So there's no question that it's huge. It's everywhere, and yet we don't appreciate it. We don't really quite know how effective it is. Hearing in general, if you're walking down a quiet street at night, suddenly you're very aware of hearing. But otherwise, we don't really think about it.
There is a condition for people who do not appreciate music. They're physically unable, anhedonia. I have to look it down and remember how to say it. They can hear music and understand it, but they get no physical or brain pleasure from it. Would you fix that if you could?
Yeah, of course. I mean, because it's one of life's great pleasures. I mean, it's definitely something that, I mean, back to psychedelic research, there is no point of research that doesn't have music as part of it, because the music shapes the experience that people are having. They want it to kind of rise and be more dramatic at the moment of most power in the actual research. I just spoke to someone who does this, which is why it's kind of current. And then it calms down and everything. So, and really even people who are the patients in this are saying it's incredibly beneficial. So yeah, there are a lot of different uses for it. I think they're all in here. This is 41 chapters, with it's an anthology.
Heavy.
But you just pick you don't have to read this cover to cover. You kind of pick your interest.
I'd like to get the audience a chance to ask some questions, and I'll ask one more question while you all think about it. And please do ask a question of Renee while we have her here with us. Because this is the future of everything, what are your plans for the future? What is next for you to further this agenda?
Well, for this agenda, so for one thing, I take this everywhere that I tour. So I'm right now touring with National Geographic, a really beautiful project called Voice of Nature, the Anthropocene. And I always offer a presentation on music in mind. I bring the audience and I invite local scientists, researchers, and healthcare providers to join with me. And audiences are fascinated. They love it. I love it. I learn everywhere I go because people are doing interesting work everywhere. And so I'll continue to do that, but we really are going to try and move the needle on policy. We have Arts and Health Week in LA coming up in June, and this is a LA County, which is a massive county, and they have, I think, the largest mental health budget in the country.
It might be the largest school system in the country
as
well, or second largest.
It's huge, and there's really a potential for changing policy and making. I would love to see, frankly, creative arts therapists in schools shoring up what arts educators are doing, and California is a great place to do that because they have the budget for it.
So, audience, who has questions? I just want to make sure that the people who have the mics are available. And right here, please stand up, say who you are, and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Peggy. I study neuroscience and art history at Harvard, where I also sing in the chapel choir. But I'm here today with the Media Lab to present a project of mine downstairs in the lab. And I'm curious, with music and neuroscience, what would be the most impactful research, not only for the impact of neuroscience on music, but also music on neuroscience? So how do you make that cross-domain meaning?
Well, this is exactly what the Neuro Investigator Awards are trying to do, is to bring people like you together with the artistic kind of vision. I mean, I personally think artists have a lot to bring to society. I can't say society is really thinking much about us right now. So that's another thing I'd really like to kind of have everybody reconsider, because it's a kind of a level of inquiry that science also has. And so, and because we come from the outside, I've been consulting with the Kennedy Center and Lyric Opera of Chicago, and now I'm with LA Opera. So I do a lot of consulting, and having that mile-high view is very useful, because you ask questions and suggest things that nobody's thinking about because they're just dealing with day-to-day. So I think that's an important idea. But in terms of, frankly, the sky's the limit. Just be creative. You are, obviously, because of the 3 things you just said you're doing at Harvard. So you will come up with things that are amazing. And a lot of things are happening, but there was redundancy. And we now have the Sound Health Network at UCSF that is a clearinghouse for all of the current research on music. And NeuroArts will have a new resource center starting in September that will be global and a much more expansive umbrella, all aesthetic experiences. So you will absolutely want to connect with both of those to find out what other people are doing, so you can think of something new.
Are there more questions? Oh, right here.
Hi, thank you. My name is David. I work with the NYU Mental Health Counseling Program. And my question is, so you have therapists who are focused specifically on music therapy. Do you see this as a more ongoing kind of therapy, or do you see value in a one-off here and there? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it really depends on what you're dealing with. There's no question that any of these art therapies, 45 minutes of any artistic activity reduces anxiety by 25%. So it's definitely been, when I should have mentioned mental health, because that is a perfect line of pursuit. And there's a lot on mental health right now. I'm also an ambassador for the World Health Organization, and we're starting to talk about an international choral initiative that really helps us feel like we're not alone, because loneliness and isolation are such an issue, as we know. But I think really that's kind of a dosage question. How much for how long? It depends on you. It depends on the patient, and also the therapist. But it's definitely worth trying. It's absolutely worth trying. And like anything, you have to get somebody that you click with.
I see a hand up over here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Kyla, and I'm wondering, if you know someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia, how would you get them started on music therapy?
Well, I had an amazing experience. I was lucky to get a Kennedy Center honor in December, and at the end of the party, a woman walked up to me literally at the end and said, "We were having a horrible time with our father, who was sundowning, was just so agitated, becoming impossible to deal with. And then we heard you speak, and we remembered that he was a huge opera fan. And so we played opera. He calmed down. He was completely happy, and we've never stopped playing it since." So, I
hope they like it.
Yeah, I think they're just relieved that he's in a better place. But it's, again, I would try. And in fact, if you have family members who are in elder care facilities, definitely ask if they have music therapists coming in. What arts interventions do they have? Because people who've experienced it and seen it say, we get it, we've seen it in action. It just really works.
We have time for one more, right here.
Hi, Renee. Thank you so much. My name is Natalie. I was curious if your take, or whether this is addressed on the book, on this idea of enclosed cognition. It's something I'm really fascinated by, the idea that perhaps what we wear affects how we feel, and even there's scientific research now, at least an itty-bitty bit, that it affects our performance. I love your outfit, by the way, too. You said you do something aesthetic every day, so I wonder if that's something you're looking into as well.
Well, I haven't seen research on it, but I'm not surprised because I've just discovered color this year, and color makes me happy. And I just worry that the next thing I'm going to be doing is collecting knickknacks. You know, it may be an aging issue. I don't know, but I would buy that 100% that it makes a difference. By the way, I'm in the Hours at the Met right now, which is drawing a massive new young audience because the relevant subjects that are in this opera are mental health, suicide, LGBTQ, 3 women struggling, and it's just been enormously popular. We have 3 more performances of, just saying.